I'm the CEO.
My name's Rich. I'm the CMO of Relative Insight.
Okay, so what we do at Relative Insight. Thanks. So we're in the business of understanding how people talk. So how we talk reveals what we think, how we express ourselves, what our preferences are, and so on and so on. It's quite basic stuff, but no one really usually figures out how to analyze it properly, and that's what we do. So in a marketing world, there are lots and lots of companies that go around targeting, like that's who to talk to. You can think of us as the data layer of how to talk to people. So we're really good at this, and we're good at it because we're not from marketing. We are we're the result of, originally we're a Lancaster University spin out, and we catch bad guys online. So we were developed in conjunction with government agencies to catch people who are masquerading online. So for instance, we know if you're a 13-year-old girl in a forum, or if you're a 40-year-old man doing a very, very good impression of a 13-year-old girl in a forum. And we do that by analyzing the language that's used. Now, the key to this, in law enforcement, you kind of approach data problems differently to how marketing tends to approach it. So in that situation, 13-year-old girl language and bad guy language, because the bad guys are being really, really good at being bad guys, they're like 95, 98% identical. So actually analyzing the language is a complete waste of time. What you're interested in is not what they say. You're interested in the difference between what they say. You're interested in the 5% or the 2% difference in language. That's what's key, and that's what we detect. So if anyone works for a brand or an agency, or I have no doubt you are sat on top of social listening, reviews, forums, maybe programmatic stuff, live chat, all kinds of stuff. And my guess is the best you've been presented with so far is a word cloud and 20% positive sentiment. And you look at this thing and you're like, and everyone's like really enthusiastic about this word cloud, and everyone's nodding, and everyone's just kind of, what is it? So what we do with our customers is layer on top of this stuff. So most companies have got fantastic language assets which they do not use. And analysts and creative directors and strategists and people like that, they want insight and they want usable, actionable intelligence. And what they're being presented with is a word cloud. And so we fix that problem. I'm not making this up as I go along. So we are one of Unilever's global analytic platforms. We're used all over the world by Unilever. Disney uses to analyze audiences, how different audiences talk about movies. National Crime Agency, and some agencies and all this kind of stuff. And we've just added Sky. We've been analyzing Sky's call center, like how you answer the phone. It's really important. And we also do quite a lot now with Procter & Gamble at a strategic level. So we've got a Slido going on somehow. So that list of language assets, whether it's social media, a bit later on we're going to talk about how we might use what you've got. So we'd be really interested to know what language assets you think you might have, which would be an interesting thing to analyze. So somewhere on the Slido.
Yeah, I believe people can log on to Slido now on Unbound London on the hashtag. You can start posting some of the questions you might have around language sources or the language sources you have. And we'll come back to that after we've had a bit of a deeper dive.
Okay.
Well, this is me. This is my bit.
This is your bit.
This is me. That's Slido. Can we jump back to my slides? So, very, very brief history of language. Some elements of this are slightly not safe for work, so and it's very fast-paced, so strap yourself in. The clicker might not work. So many years ago, does anyone know which movie this is? By the way, can you see it? 2001, someone said. Yes, someone got it. So many, many years ago, there weren't many of us around. And to communicate with each other, it was quite straightforward, right? So we would use grunts, and that all worked very well. But basically, we became really, really good at procreation. And there were lots more of us around. Hooray, there's loads of us around. Happy photo. So we started expanding our language. So that we developed the concept of noun, so naming things. And then we wanted to describe what we were doing, so the concept of verbs and then adjectives. And all of a sudden, our sentences are becoming really, really quite complicated. Not quite as complicated as the sentences this guy uses. He's got the literacy of a 7th grader, which interestingly resonates really well with a lot of people.
I know words. I have the best words. But there's no better word than stupid.
Quite. But so basically, to process all of this language, our brains, we kind of, in IT terms, we threw hardware at the problem. And our brains almost doubled in size overnight. So that's quite dangerous, it turns out, because brains are quite heavy. And they're also very expensive. Not like this, they're expensive in terms of the energy that's used. So at any point in time, up to 25% of your energy is being expended by your brain, and it increases. So it's a hugely intensive task. So we had to develop better ways of filtering. I couldn't find a decent image for a filter, by the way, so I chose a sieve. Makes sense. So we developed better ways of filtering. One of the ways that we filter language is that we use comparison. So at any given point, you're listening to or reading what's being said, and you're comparing it to something else you've heard or read, and you do this to tease out the 5 to 10% difference in what's been said that's important. It's that kind of batch of gold at the top. So basically what I'm saying is 90% of what I'm saying is crap, and you're trying to figure out what's important, and therefore what you should remember. And this is I wasn't going to play this. This is actually what happens when your 5-year-old son finds emojis on your new mobile phone. Thank you, Flynn. But all of this means a lot of things in research. But the basic thing that it means is that search is not equal to discovery. If you remember anything from this session, remember this. We're all used to search, right? So we use Google, we use Yahoo, we use whatever you want to use as your search engine. In marketing, we're really fixated on social listening, and it's a really effective search engine. If you know what you're looking for, that is a very useful mechanism. What it's not great for is discovering new things. So, does anyone know who this guy is? Go on. Donald Rumsfeld. Latterly, Secretary of State of Defense, had loads of roles for the US government. He infamously, during the Iraq War, started talking about unknown unknowns. Put your hand up if you understand what that means. No one ever understands it. One person. I'm not. So he was actually using very clumsy language to describe what we do, which comes from a principle in psychology that was applied to forensic linguistics. And it's called the Johari Window. If you want to look it up on Wikipedia, there's a really good article about it. But what it says is there's basically 3 buckets when it comes to intelligence and information. There's stuff that we know to search for, therefore when we found it, that's one bucket. Then there's stuff that we know what it is, so we know what to search for, but we've not quite found it yet. That's the second bucket. And then there are the unknown unknowns, which are the things that we don't even know what they are, therefore we don't know what to search for, and we've certainly not found them yet. But it's this that we're really good at finding with relative insight. They're the kind of golden nuggets in how people use language that are super useful for the brands and agencies we work for. Stepping back slightly, there's a flood of language here, right? So thinking about language, typical sources that people shout out at me are social sources like Twitter, but there's also conversational sources. Reviews are a big thing. There's a reason why Amazon's going to be the first billion-dollar company, and it's down to the reviews.
Trillion.
Children. Trillion.
Trillion dollar.
Trillion dollar. Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Very well rehearsed, obviously. Forums. So people don't think about this. Mumsnet is doubling in size year on year. It is huge. I know it's just one example of an online forum. People forget about them, but they're a goldmine. Put your hand up if you've got one of these. If you haven't got one and would like one, we've got a competition to win one at our booth. So come over and give us your business card. But it took, I've got a few of these now in the house, and it took my 6-year-old about 2 minutes to go from what's that black thing in the corner to a flurry of emails in my inbox for various Pikachu soft toys and other stuff. So clearly, kids are engaging with this more and more, even more than mobile phones and iPads. Voice is becoming a huge thing. All of these things are huge sources of language. It's a flood of language. And it's this that we deal with at Relative Insight. Your turn, Ben.
So, by now, I hope we've convinced you that comparing stuff's a good idea, both to put people in jail, which is fun, but also to analyze language, but it all seems a bit abstract. So what we're going to do, we're going to go through some real stuff. So what we're going to do, have we got the laptop set up for the live demo as well?
Yes.
Cool. So I'm going to walk you through a quick example here, and then we're actually going to demo the tool that we have, and we're going to walk through some live data. So we're going to talk about makeup. So one of our customers is Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble own Olay. And they were looking at strategies about how to sell more Olay to a younger audience. So one of the things we did was we looked at how women in America review makeup online. So if you take and aggregate all the reviews of 20-year-olds reviewing makeup with 50-year-olds and compare them, well, 80% is exactly the same because they're talking about makeup. It's kind of what you'd expect. But there's 20% difference. And one of the differences is that 20-year-olds tend to say they wear makeup, and 50-year-olds tend to say they apply makeup. So now this might even sound irrelevant, it's so subtle, but it's really, really important because brands need to be authentic and resonate with the very target group they're trying to go after. Now, there will be no prize for guessing what Olay was saying while it was going after a younger audience. And it makes a tangible difference in the effectiveness of ads, this kind of stuff. And the other key thing here is going back to the search and discovery. Nobody thought, hey, I'm going to search for the word wear in makeup context and see what happens, or I'm going to search for the word apply. They just don't do it. So this was quite a dramatic finding, and it did alter the ads language. But it was part of a larger project where we looked at the broader context and strategy for Procter & Gamble and Olay. Now, Olay competes against Botox as much as it competes against L'Oreal. That's the context and the frame of the mind of the consumer. So Olay had several campaigns which were framed around, don't take drastic measures and use cosmetic surgery, use Olay instead. But of course, what society views as a drastic measure changes over time. So one of the things we did for them was take forum language of discussion around cosmetic surgery, grabbed it all, and compared it over time to see what the differences were forward in time, to see how the societal discussion around cosmetic surgery had changed. And it's changed quite radically from the kind of themes that people tend to discuss. The further back in time you go, the more likely people are going to ask for reassurance that it's the right thing to do. The more contemporary the language, it's, hey, I'm getting it done, I don't care what anyone says. And it's much more specific, it's about certain procedures. It's not medical anymore, it's about going to your tech in an office and having an injector. It's not about having surgery, and so on and so on. So for Olay, this was really important, and they ended up actually changing quite a lot of their positioning and framing because of this. So what we're going to do now, seamlessly.
Who's going first?
Shall we do... We'll do car phone warehouse first.
Okay, I'll do that one.
So just while this is getting set up, one of the...
Can we switch to the laptop?
Seamlessly switched. And this is the tool. What we do is conceptually pretty simple. It's just comparing two sets of language and telling you the difference. It's really clever under the hood. But what we're going to show you now are some data sets being compared and the language differences in those data sets being exposed in the tool and showing you what that has meant and what the interesting stuff is.
Are these working? That'll be super. Yeah. So for Car Phone Warehouse, so this was an interesting one. They came to us through their agency and said, oh, it wouldn't be wonderful if we understood how millennials talk about mobile phones. So they were basically, well, they initially were talking about all kinds of ages, but it turned out they were focused on new consumers, millennials and leaning into Gen Z. And they didn't know where they were going to get the data from. So they were talking about all kinds of avenues for that. You can pull language from surveys, so they could run a survey and then pull the language in, and then we could analyse that. But it was all going to take a lot of time until we realised actually they've got 15,000 reviews of mobile phones on their own website, which quite handily has age, gender, and location attached to it. So we took that off the website and start splitting it and comparing it. And this is this is our dashboard. Very live. This is a subset of the data, just to make it simple, but we've split out here millennial conversations. So for them, this was anyone between 18 and 29 years old. I know everyone's got their own definition of millennial, but this was theirs. And we're going to compare it. So we're going to look at how it compares to everyone else, basically, Gen X and baby boomers. So what you see here is a little sentence at the top of our dashboard that tells you what you're looking at, actually. So here we're looking at differences. So this is a comparison of the differences in initially topics between how millennials talk about their phones and how older people talk about their phones. And there are a number of observations. I'm going to just quickly go through a few of them. So we see this a lot in millennial conversations and young people's conversations. Basically, the younger you are, the more you know about everything, right? So you tend to use a lot more superlatives and absolute languages, and we see that coming through here. So they're likely to be using definitely and abbreviations of that and phrases associated to it that are very, very absolute in nature. They also, so electricity and electrical equipment and life is both topics relate to conversations around the battery life. So they're much more focused on the battery and the life of the battery than older people. If we click into art and design here, this is conversations about the camera. So you're starting very quickly to get a picture on where the interests lie and what the style of language they're using. So we see here exclusivizers and particularizers. That sounds interesting. It's, again, absolute language. This is the only phone that you would ever need. I would never look at another phone. It's very, very, very distinct. But now if we switch this around, if I click this little icon here and look at how Gen X and baby boomers think about phones and how they talk about them way more than millennials, well, I think it's no great surprise that older people tend to relate things back to the family. I mean, that's a fairly obvious thing, I would say. But it is conversations about my daughter's recommended a phone, my wife wants me to get this phone, and we can go down to the sentence level here if we want to and get examples of that. Lots of conversations about family. Where it gets more interesting is this stuff around helping and books. It turns out people sort of my age and north, we open a phone box and wonder where the hell the manual is, right? So we're so used to getting manuals with electrical goods that it's a bit of an odd thing. But actually the reason that we're astonished by this, it all relates back to support. So where am I going to get support if it's not through the manual? That's the question. And on we go in, and we can delve into, I'm not going to, but you can come over to the booth and we can delve into a bit more detail around the conversations here. But they're very, very distinct conversations. And this feeds into strategy now, because if you're running a home a huge number of stores like Carphone Warehouse do, they can now make a gateway decision about your age when you walk through the door, which they do. So if they think you're older than about 30, they're going to start quizzing you about the family. They're going to start talking about support channels, and they're going to start talking about the telephone support that they have as well. If they think you're younger than 30, they're going to start talking about the battery life. They're going to cross-sell you a battery pack, and they're going to use very absolute language about everything, and they're going to talk at length about the camera and the quality of the images that you can capture with that. So it fed into a big piece of strategy for them.
Cool. So what's interesting about that is that they were kind of nowhere. Like, how would you have found that out without us? And the answer is normally focus groups or surveys and stuff like that, which takes a long time, is kind of a poor sample set, and is also kind of biased because you're asking the question, and so people quite often answer the question in the way they think you want to hear it. So, that was a great example of like speed to insight. It was a day, when conventionally it would take kind of months. So we do a lot of other work, and what I'm going to talk about now is the concept of an audience. So as we've said, a lot of our customers are big CPGs, right? So big, well-known brands. And it's always really tempting for a brand to obsess on how is my brand discussed, which is natural enough, because you do want to know it, and it is important. But quite often, you don't want to know how your brand is discussed. You really want to know how the audience you're trying to target talks. And the epiphany for this was, I won't name who it was, but it was an ice cream brand. And the brief was, how do teenagers talk about our brand of ice cream on Twitter compared to how millennials talk about our brand of ice cream on Twitter? Answer: no self-respecting teenager is talking about your brand of ice cream on Twitter. Get a grip. So what was more interesting there was not that question. It was actually, well, what you want to start with is, how do teenagers talk on Twitter? And then how do teenagers talk about snacking on Twitter? And then comparing how teenagers talk about snacking with how millennials talk about snacking, and comparing that, and that actually revealed big differences in trigger points and events for snacking. So the two groups actually are, they go and snack based on different events. And that's useful to know. That's a thing you can use in strategy. So this started off a whole series of research and some really interesting projects on how audiences talk, not how brands talk. And what I'm going to show you is not that. It is this. So this is some stuff we did for Disney. Around the movie Beauty and the Beast, which came out last year, I think March. Now, it's one of those movies which it's really tricky, right? Because it's highly loved by lots of different people, lots of different potential audiences. And so how you market to the different audiences is really important. So what we've got here are audience models. These are really big, millions of word data sets, which represent how certain groups of people talk. And the proxies here are fan bases. So for example, this one here is people who follow Emma Watson on Twitter. And what we do is that we take that list of people, and then we take everything those people say about everything on Twitter. It's all public. And group it together. And then what you've got is a data model for how fans of Emma Watson talk about everything in life. But of course, being an Emma Watson fan isn't necessarily the same as being a Hermione Granger fan. So there's an unofficial Twitter account for Hermione Granger. So being a Hermione Granger fan is different, and so on. And so what we've got here is, Be Our Guest is Disney's official Twitter account. So if you follow that, you're a Disney fan. BATB Movie News is a fan account for Beauty and the Beast. So if you're following this, you're one of the Beauty and the Beast super fans. So the trick for Disney is, right, well, we've really got to understand how the super fans talk about this movie, because we've really got to get that right. So if you compare how those two groups talk about everything, lots of interesting stuff comes out. The most important was actually this, recorded sound. So superfans talk about playlists and music and so on, so, really twice as much as regular Disney fans. And Beauty and the Beast being a musical, that's a really key point to weave into the strategy. But by doing other types of analysis, for example, if we look at phrases they tend to use, bit of Spanish in there, look, way more like Snapchat, video chat, YouTube. This is used way, way more by this audience compared to the regular audience. So this also gives you strategy when it comes to targeting as well. So we have 10 minutes.
Can we switch back to the slides? What we're going to do now is see if there are any questions that you have from Slido around data sources, or indeed any other questions you want to shout out. So how is your analysis impacted if the person is not speaking in their native language, Ben? Put you on the spot.
So what we tend to do, I'm going to duck the question, actually. So who asked the question? What was the context? Why are you asking?
I used to live in Dubai.
Yeah.
Everybody's foreign, so there's kind of a different language.
Yeah.
Comparing to Dubai, there's not English.
It's like everyone converges on expat language, the expat version of English or something.
How useful is this?
Well, I think it depends on what you're trying to find out. So, I mean, if you're trying to understand how the style of English in Dubai has changed over the last 5 years, you can do like, well, this is how it was 5 years ago. This is how it is now. And what's the difference? So you can start to see, what trigger words are being used more, what topics are being discussed more, and so on and so on.
I've actually just remembered a specific example, if I can cut in rudely. One of our clients did some analysis of English, and when we looked at it and looked at the content, we realised that it was Indian English. So it was for a brand out there, and they were basically doing SWOT analysis, right? So they were comparing how people were talking about their dessert brand with the competitor products. And the net result was pretty much, as any other project goes, they were able to uncover the differences, but critically they found two activation points for the product that they didn't even know existed. So this was a product line that had been around for 2 decades plus, I believe. So they thought they knew everything about the consumer. But there were 2 activations around religious holidays that they didn't know anything about, and they've now used the evidence formed from that project to create campaigns that are running in the region.
So on the Olay question, who asked the... They asked and left.
They've done it
They're
right.
not admitting. So Olay was amazing piece of work. Probably one of the best things we've ever done. Easily the most impactful was the change in the emotion, anxieties, insecurities that people are expressing. And we've done quite a lot of similar things to cosmetic surgery. So things like, caring for your elderly parents. How do people talk about that? How's that changed over time? What are the pressures and so on? So the cosmetic surgery one was the most surprising, in retrospect, maybe not surprising, but certainly the most impactful was the rapid shift to the transactional nature of the conversation. So when you go back in time, people, should I do this? I don't know. I'm talking to my mom. She doesn't think I should do it. What do you think? And so on and so on. And it's quite supportive, and it's pretty emotive, actually. And now it's like, give me a review, give me before and after. Who was your injector? Which office did you go to? It's got really quite transactional. It's also got extraordinarily specific. People don't talk about generic stuff. They talk about very specific procedures for specific problems around the face. Yeah, it was. I mean, there was a whole bunch of stuff about it, but I think those two things would be the things I would pick out about it.
So there's a question there about language support, which is really relevant to us. So we've just switched on support for 14 European languages and Indonesian for some reason.
Can't forget Indonesian.
But it's there. So the answer is yes, we now support Spanish and lots of others, Portuguese, French.
German.
I'm not going to list them all.
Yeah.
There's 14 of them.
Okay. How long are we doing on time?
We've got time if anyone has any other questions. If not, you can come and catch us at the end. Or we've got a booth around the corner just near the Italian delegation. So you can come and dig us out there and enter our competition to win an Amazon Echo. Any questions?
Yep.
What's the minimum data set size that you need to do a useful comparison?
The question was, what's the minimum data set size that we need to do a valid comparison? We tend not to do it on any less than 1,000 words in each set. And a lot of them go up to tens of millions. I mean, to put all that in context, the average novel is about 130,000 words. And we regularly do like 5 million. The system compensates though, so the less words there are to analyze, we won't draw out as many differences because there isn't enough evidence. Yeah, so rather than having like 20 confident differences, there'll only be like 5 confident differences.
Any other questions? Cool. Well, thank you very much for coming along. Greatly appreciate your time. And hopefully we'll see you at the booth.
Thanks a lot.